child of the King, a child of the King, with Jesus my Savior. I'm a child of the King.
Thank you, ladies. Child of the King. We never forget that. The sermon that I'm going to present to you this morning is one that was, before it was edited and changed and abbreviated by me, it was written by Lincoln Steed, who you saw this morning. He's the director of the Religious Liberty, editor of the magazine and director of that foundation. And he's been there for a number of years. Shakespeare once famously wrote, "What's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet." Well, when I think of religious liberty, and we're thinking of that today, even though it's just once a year for Seventh-day Adventists, but ideally it should be remembered in a grander sweep. When we think of religious liberty, the same question comes up. Religious liberty. You're for it, I'm for it. I've never met anybody opposed to religious liberty. As Seventh-day Adventists, we derive our religious liberty convictions directly from the Bible. In the U.S. Constitution, equally that right, these unalienable rights, are credited as coming from a creator. But in reality, when people say they are for religious liberty, they really mean many different things, because this rose can be smelled many different ways. If you needed proof of this, think for a moment that in the weeks not too far behind us, we were witness to the head of the largest Christian church, the Pope of Rome, traveling as a conquering hero to Washington, D.C., to Philadelphia, then on to New York City and the United Nations, and speaking grandly, not just of the environment, but of religious liberty. In fact, speaking as a champion of religious liberty. You and I know that things are not quite as they seem, but it's worth thinking for a moment that religious liberty can mean many different things to many different people. In the months before the Pope's visit, there was a furor in the United States where a clerk from down in Kentucky put herself on the line saying that she would not issue marriage licenses for gay couples. She was put up as a great heroine for religious liberty, standing for her principles. Very few thought that in this case, religious liberty, the right to hold a view, to project it, was perhaps not true religious liberty, because in reality, this individual regarded her inner thoughts, and we can't speak directly of them, we don't know exactly what they are, but in the way that she carried them forward to her supporters, they thought that it was fully acceptable for her views to be projected onto her assistants. But what about her assistants? Regardless of what her assistants thought, they were told that they could not do what the state had demanded, but that their principle must coincide with hers. That's not religious liberty. God never forces the conscience, even though he will entreat and encourage, and yes, punish by consequence for the wrong choice. But we are free moral agents, and if religious liberty means anything, that's what we are, free moral agents created by God, who gave us this incredible gift. Very often when we talk about religious liberty, we remind the listeners as Seventh-day Adventists of the three angels' messages. They are central to what we hold to be, as Ellen White once said, present truth. And I want to remind you of the first angel's message. The first angel says that we are to fear God and honor him who created heaven and earth, Revelation in 14. Let me read that verse to you. 14:6. It says, "And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven with an eternal gospel." In other words, a never-ending story. Gospel is really God's story. An eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe, tongue, and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come." That's present truth. We are to announce that the disposition where people can do what they want, are free to do as they want. It's coming to an end, and there is a reckoning. And worship him, he says, who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountain of waters. That goes back to creation. That also goes back to the fourth commandment. I've thought for a long time that consistent with our first angel's message, we Seventh-day Adventists should be foremost in calling people to recognize that we are custodians of nature. We should be environmentalists, maybe not the free-floating, new age, perhaps even liberal construct that many people put to that, but we should be environmental in the truest sense of recognizing that we are here as custodians of what God has created, we ourselves, our bodies, and our environment. I think we've missed the boat on this, and it's an amazing pass that the Bishop of Rome, the present Pope, in his encyclical of the environment and his visit to the United States, has taken a lead in promoting not just the environment, but in conjunction with that, linking it to loyalty to God and indeed to worship on that particular day to celebrate that creation. It's amazing. It could hardly be credited some years ago, even though you and I have long had the great controversy put together under inspiration and under the pen of Ellen White. And of course, with some research assistance, where they reached into history through the Middle Ages and right up to our present day. And then with prophetic pen in 1911, Ellen White wrote us what would happen next. But it has happened now, and who could credit this reality? Reading from the Great Controversy, pages 589 and 590, while appearing to the children of men as a great physician who can heal their maladies, he will bring disease and disaster, talking about the devil, until populous cities will reduce to ruin and desolation. Even now he is at work in accidents and calamities by sea and land, in great conflagrations, fires, in fierce tornadoes, in terrific hailstorms, in tempests, floods, cyclones, tidal waves, earthquakes, and in every place in 1,000 forms Satan is exercising his power. He sweeps away the ripening harvest, and famine and distress follow. He imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish by the pestilence. These visitations are to become more and more frequent and disastrous. Destruction will be upon both men and beast. The earth, mournful and fadeth away. The haughty people do languish. The earth is also defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. And right now that's getting disguised as carbon, too much carbon in the environment. A decade or so ago, Pope John Paul II came out with a document called the Lord's Day Dies Domini, and it laid out every biblical text in favor of the seventh-day Sabbath and accepted them at face value. And there, embedded within this wonderful biblical homily, the encyclical said that every early Christian church had no instruction from the Lord to change the day from Sabbath to Sunday. They felt that they had the authority. With that out of the way, everything in the Bible that related to the seventh-day Sabbath was applied to Sunday. It was a masterful exercise in bait and switch, if you like. But here, in this most recent encyclical, Pope Francis begins this way, almost a New Age approach. He says, in the wonderful words of the beautiful canticle by St. Francis Assisi, he reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we have a life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. That's not a religious concept, but a little later, this is what appears in the document. He says, it is my hope that this encyclical letter can help us to acknowledge the appeal, immensity, and urgency of the challenge we face. I will begin by reviewing the present encyclical crisis with the aim of providing a concrete foundation for the ethical and spiritual itinerary that follows. There is an agenda here. It continues, I will then consider some principles drawn on the Judeo-Christian tradition. I will advance some broader proposals for dialogue and action, which would involve each of us as individuals and also affect international policy. What could be international policy that a Pope of Rome, a religious leader standing in the political pulpit, be about to share? Well, this is what he says. The laws found in the Bible dwell on relationships, not only among individuals, but also among other living things. Along these same lines, rest on the seventh day meant not only for human beings, but also so that, quoting from the Bible in Exodus 23:12, it says, your ox and your donkey may have rest. The biblical tradition, he continues, clearly shows that this renewal entails recovering and respecting the rhythms inscribed in nature by the hand of the Creator. We see this, for example, in the law of the Sabbath. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work. He commanded Israel to set aside each seventh day as a day of rest. Glory to God, we might say. God bless you, Brother Pope. You're doing our work for us, proclaiming the seventh day Sabbath. Unfortunately, he called it a Jewish Sabbath. And he continues saying, a spirituality which forgets God as all-powerful and creator is not acceptable. This is how we end up worshiping earthly powers or ourselves usurping the place of God, even to the point of claiming an unlimited right to trample his creation underfoot. What does the Bible say? You and I should be following through on this. It says, God is coming to destroy those who destroy the earth. And Paul says that the whole creation is groaning together till now, waiting for its redemption. I don't think that this is out of line, but it's misapplied here, because what comes next, he says, on Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationship with God, with ourselves, and with others, and with the world. In other words, the environment. Sunday is the day of the resurrection, the first day of the new creation. His first fruits are the Lord's risen humanity, the pledge of the final transfiguration of all created reality. It also proclaims It also proclaims man's eternal rest in God. That's an amazing pass that before the assembled multitudes of the world, through the United Nations, through speeches to the Family Institute there in Philadelphia, and then through the legislators in what we in the United States keep saying is the world's only superpower. Here, the world's religious superpower is claiming Sunday as a signal landmark of the Creator and to call honor to creation. He's proclaiming Sunday. If there was ever a religious liberty issue for the Seventh-day Adventists, this is it. Revelation 8:14, the second angel's message. The second angel followed and said, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all nations drink of the maddening wine of her adulteries. In 1888, Alonzo T. Jones, a great Seventh-day Adventist pioneer for religious liberty, spent much of his energy and time before Congress and dealing with an initiative that was popping up in Congress. It was led by Senator Blair, a direct national Sunday law, and you can go online and read the terms of it if you wish. It was about as blatant as it comes, and said there that under the pain of the law, all work, all secular activity was to cease, and that people were encouraged to worship. We do not yet have such a law again, but in fighting that law successfully in his time, Alonzo T. Jones recognized, and Ellen White confirmed, that the battle against Sunday law and upholding God's principles is the ultimate religious liberty challenge. Ellen White said that the Liberty Sentinel, which was the direct precursor to the Liberty magazine, was the epitome of the three angels' messages, and it should contain appeals to the Lord's Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, and it should have the present truth within it. That is before us now. This time, same time, the Seventh-day Adventist rally. This should be a time as A.T. Jones in 1888 when he stood before the General Conference in Minneapolis, and then two other times in subsequent years. This is the time that we should recognize to seek the Lord and to rededicate ourselves to his service. We can't force revival, but if ever there were a series about religious liberty, it's now. We are going to see an even greater wonders ahead of us, along with terrible dislocations, financial and environmental. Of course, the Pope is on to something. The bears in the Arctic are not hibernizing as they once were. There's water where there was once sheets of ice. and the nations are fighting over the open waters near the North Pole. The earth is groaning in its travail. This is not business as usual. It is time for Seventh-day Adventists to wake up. And of course, if we're filled with the Spirit of God, we should exult, because this is in the moment to proclaim as never before that God's freedom and God's liberty is ours for the having. But we must not compromise by a false construct, and certainly a false day. The day is fast spent, and it's troubling to me that so many Adventists are negligent, unaware, or denying of its realities. Let me read something to you that was prepared by the Review and Herald in 1898. Speaking about the Sabbath, this is what will be done. Ellen White speaks of it being trampled underfoot. God's great memorial of creation, established to commemorate his work, and in its stead, this power has presented to the world a common working day that makes the so-called family rest day as common as it should always be seen. It's not God's day. It's common working day, she says. This day here is set up as a rival Sabbath to be honored and observed. Thus the world has been turned against God, and for the Lord declares that he has sanctified the day of his rest. But though every member of human family should accept this child of the papacy, it's not politic to say such things now. But it was written down, and it still sits there, and it's in our archives. Then Ellen White writes, the Sunday is a child of the papacy. And let's go further back. It's a day of paganism. Remember, they merged with the sun worshippers. This child of the papacy, she says, in no case should this invalidate the holy Sabbath of Jehovah. Those who we accept the false Sabbath exalt the man of sin, and assail the government of God. But the man of sin cannot annul what God has declared shall stand forever. The work now to be done in our world is to exalt the law of the Lord and call the attention to the people of it. The time has come when the truth is to be proclaimed against falsehood and error. Let me give you an insight into the logic that has taken grip of the religious liberty world, for example. This is a term that I know many of you have already heard. It's repeated initially in a church context, but it's reached by the larger political world. They speak about doing something for the common good. And of course, the Pope's speech on the environment before Congress was all of this nature. But the common good is exactly the same sort of rubric that Jesus' day was invoked against him. It is better the one man die than the whole nation should perish. Jesus was killed for the common good. It's better for a common good to keep the Sunday law. They might say that as they sweep away a few dissidents because they're destroying the common good. They're disrupting our unanimity, our survival coalition. The common good is set against individual rights. And fairly recently, Lincoln Steed, attending a major convocation of religious leaders, I won't say what the denomination, but it reflected a particular religious bias. And the main speaker got up and said this. It was not subtle at all. He said there are much more emphasis given to the individual rights of conscience and not enough to the corporate rights of the church. For that to gain credence in the United States, particularly where the rights of the individual are said to trump all sorts of prelates and kings. That means that we are very close to the dynamic found in the Bible several times and repeated by Ellen White. I'm going to go back now to a statement made when the Pope was here in September. Two well-known evangelists were part of an audience with him, Joel Osteen, which we've all heard of, and Rick Warren. Rick Warren wrote the book Purpose-Driven Life. You know, they were invited to this audience with the Pope, and they came away so enamored with what he said that I'm just going to paraphrase this. But they said, paraphrasing, that we should put our collective tails between our legs and plead for the Mother Church, the papacy, to take the Protestants back. That's basically the essence of what they had said. Here's what Mrs. White says. Great Controversy 592. Again, this was written in 1911. As the Protestant churches reject the clear spiritual arguments in defense of God's law, they will long to silence those whose faith they cannot overthrow by the Bible. Talking about the Protestant churches here. Though they blind their own eyes to the fact, they are now adopting a course which will lead to the persecution of those who consciously refuse to do what the rest of the Christian world are doing and acknowledge the claims of the papal Sabbath. The dignitaries of church and state will unite to bribe, persuade, and compel all classes to honor Sunday. The lack of the divine authority will be supplied by oppressive enactments. Political corruption is destroying love of justice and regard for truth, and even in free America, rulers and legislatures, in order to secure public favor, will yield to the popular demand. Remember, for the common good. For law enforcing Sunday observance. Liberty of conscience, which has cost so great a sacrifice, will no longer be respected. In the soon coming conflict, we shall see exemplified in the prophet's words, "The dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus." Revelation 12:17. This dynamic might seem bizarre, but it is upon us, and I believe, to repeat what I said before, every Seventh-day Adventist inherits a heritage from the Reformation, a heritage from A.T. Jones and other great pioneers who stood on principle. Early Adventists even served on the chain gangs for breaking blue laws, little mini Sunday laws. It's contingent upon us, the inheritors of this great charter in history. It's contingent on us to speak truth to power, to define religious liberty correctly, not just as something we defend. It cannot be lost. It can only be forgotten. It can only be attacked by others, because religious liberty is nothing other than the proclamation that Jesus gave there in Nazareth, that it is freedom to the captives. We are set at liberty from the power of sin and given back power to make choices as sovereign creatures created by a creator God. This is a wonderful passage for this day and hour of enslavement around the world. As a young person, I remember reading Ellen White's descriptions of the second coming and noting that the slave will respond. We have slavery. On a grand scale, we have systems where the individual is pressed down. Many voices are not heard. They do not have much ability to emphasize their human potential. Just heard on the news on Thursday, and we all know about the refugee situation in Syria and Iraq. For a time I thought, well, why can't we just get rid of the Assad regime in Syria and let the people go back? But I was watching a video that Conrad Vine put out just a few weeks ago. For some of you that know, Conrad Vine was our minister here about 5 years ago, and he left to take the position of President Director of Adventist Frontier Missions. And so he gets into these places, and he sees these things firsthand. Conrad says they have nothing to go back for. There's nothing left. So it stands to reason that we have this tremendous influx of refugees, and then they're not coming here as much as they're coming into Europe. They're going into all of the countries of Europe in heavy numbers. Well, they want their kids educated, and life must go on. The problem they're having in the Netherlands is that the Dutch, first of all, the Dutch are very, they're proud of their ability to raise swine. Let's just put it that way. And the students, these Muslim children that are going to school, just like us, don't want to eat pork. So as of Thursday, the government in the Netherlands made it a mandate that pork is served in all school lunches. All of them. I heard a groan from the teacher over here. We have to side with the Muslims in this case. We absolutely have to. And this is just another example of things that are closing in. People don't respect personal freedoms. They don't respect your wish. for following the Bible or following whatever your faith is. And that's the most important thing, is that people have to have the ability to worship how their conscience feels, not how somebody else's conscience feels. It's time for us to proclaim the second angel's message, which speaks of a fallen Babylon, fallen for many reasons, but not least of all in honoring a false Sabbath. And it's time for us to speak of the third angel, where we will avoid compromising our souls in thought, action, and deed, and alliance. We must not compromise with the false Sabbath, the false worship, the false teachings, the false concepts of religious liberty itself. May God bless you. Our closing song is hymn number